Hi, my name is Hannah Leatherman. I'm a second year in the Public Humanities MA here at Brown, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our center, Brown University, and the City of Providence sit on the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag peoples. We note too that our university drew its early life's blood from the African slave trade in the Americas, and that there are buildings here constructed by enslaved people. These acknowledgements commit us, as a community, to a lifetime of anti-racist work. Gerard is a professor of Africana and Romance Studies, a faculty fellow at the Atkinson Center for a Sustainable Future, and co-principal investigator of the Rural Humanities Initiative at Cornell University. As a leader of Rural Humanities, a new campus-wide initiative housed at Cornell Society for the Humanities and supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Professor Aking leverages his specialty in 19th and 20th century Caribbean literatures and intellectual histories, and specific focus on relations between slavery and philosophy to address the rural-urban divide and the complex realities of Black lives in rural America, particularly in central Western New York. With current research projects including just war theory, sovereignty and the invention of the Indian, and witnessing and empathy in abolitionist philanthropic humanitarianism, Professor Aking also leads the Rural Humanities Spring Methods and Practices Seminar, this year focusing on rural Black lives from historical and contemporary perspectives that examine slavery, abolitionism, and the Underground Railroad in central New York. As a museum educator in Western Massachusetts, and now as a student of public humanities here at Brown, I've been excited to follow Professor Aking's work as he and his colleagues in rural humanities demonstrate the urgent need and potential for public scholarship and practice within rural communities like the one I grew up in. Today, I'm excited to hear more about how that commitment to intersectional and engaged public work guides an ongoing mission to represent rural lives complexly and equitably, to share and interpret the stories of those who too often are omitted from the diverse rural landscape. Professor Aking, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your work and for sharing a little bit of it with us today.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's a pleasure to be among you, and I would also like to thank Marissa Brown and also the John Nicholas Brown Center for the invitation. It's always great to be able to share this work because learning curves are involved, and I'm always interested in people's experience with the work. You know, one of the things that I would, that's been on my mind has been how to sort of look at, and I think it's something that you probably engage with all the time, is the work of thinking through projects in the humanities and their engagement. But, instead of sort of just describing that briefly now, I think the best thing I can do is sort of demonstrate the work that I and we have been doing here at Cornell. So let me share the screen for a minute. And it's in a second. And so what I've promised to do today was to think about this particular subject, which I've titled the Rural Black Lives Project and the Co-Creation of Knowledge. What I wanted to do is to have us look at the Rural Humanities Initiative, which, as Hannah told us, has been supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for a 4-year period. The subject this year will be the rural Black lives. Now, the sentence below points to something that I think I wanted to share and have feedback on as well, because I've been trained in my scholarship on the Caribbean, mostly Pan-Caribbean, looking at sort of colonial literature and culture in the Spanish, French, and English-speaking Caribbean. And so to be where I am in a sort of landlocked area in central New York State, this has been a sort of a dawning that there is work here that could also serve for me to elaborate some more on my own reflections on slavery, abolition, and so on. Whereas I've done that mostly in the area of Cuba in the 19th century. I am in, and Cornell is also in an area that was also important for the Underground Railroad. So it's from that a particular seminar that I run. I've been doing that for the last 6 years, that have been able to access certain institutes, certain initiatives on campus that make the work quite community engaged, and also with public humanities at the center. So what I would like to do is also take you now to perhaps my own training in a sense, and that began a couple of years ago when the provost created a position called the Provost Fellow for Public Engagement, and I was able to work with Engaged Cornell. Engaged Cornell is an ethos that actually looks at the co-creation of knowledge. Knowledge should be mutually created and beneficial. That's the idea. And as you will see, I would encourage you to explore this page when you have the time. The whole fund was started by a gift from the Einhorn Family Trust of New York City. It was a 10-year gift. And the idea was to sort of change or transform in some way the culture of the university so that we could begin to think about the work that we do and the work that we do in conjunction with the communities around us. Now, it's a project that fit very nicely with the identity of Cornell University as this hybrid, of Ivy League and land grant institution. And so the notion of working with the community, which has long been part of the history of Cornell, especially since Cornell began as a sort of an agricultural college, so that in terms of agriculture, there's been a long-standing tradition of work with Cornell and the community. So this now has been taken to a broader sort of network of projects, but also of thinking, because when I was there for the 2-year position, one of the questions that emerged was, what are the responsibilities of a land-grant institution for the 21st century? In the past, there may have been the bias where, since Cornell is also a state university because of its land-grant institution status, the idea was, well, the contract colleges, for example, the vet school, the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, sort of already fulfilled that part of the identity of being a land-grant institution. But now, we've been thinking that it's very appropriate for us to be thinking about what are those responsibilities in other parts of the university, and specifically in the endowed part of the university. So that's one of the big questions that came up through Engaged Cornell, and my work with them was basically to give the faculty version and of engagement and the ways in which we could do that. I was also brought on, in fact, to be active in thinking about this in terms of the humanities and engaging with my colleagues in the humanities. And I can say this right now, one of the interesting things that came out of my observations during the time at Engaged Cornell was the fact that I had many colleagues with very interesting projects, but then that next step of how do you actually move out into the community, or even before moving out into the community, just thinking of the work in terms of public humanities. And by that, sort of the way that we were thinking of public humanities, and it's also something that we would see in the Rural Humanities Initiative, is just being able to think of public-facing work. How do you turn your projects into public-facing projects? So in terms of Engaged Cornell, this was, as I said, a kind of apprenticeship for me to be able to see not only the possibilities, the difficulties of doing this kind of work in the humanities, but also it gave me a panorama of all the very interesting things going on at a large university like this. So that in fact, when it came time to think about the Rural Humanities Initiative, just a second, let me switch to, when it came time to do this, I think the advantage for me in putting together the application for the Mellon Foundation funding together with Paul Fleming, who is the director of the Society for the Humanities. I think the advantage that I had was to be able to see all the different projects that were going on in parts of in the university that had a tradition of working with community partners. And there are some colleges that is their bread and butter, you know, so to be able to see that was very interesting. And then also to be able to think of the ways in which we could do that. Now, the ways in which we could do that, by that I mean in terms of the Rural Humanities Initiative, is also to assume a certain humility about going out into the community and doing this type of work. We didn't have the experience, but what we could say was we had many colleagues who could instruct us, advise us, help us, assist us, you know, accompany us in trying to do this work. So the idea behind, you know, the application was to present the best case that we could, that Cornell was a place in which we could begin to do this type of work, precisely because we've had, and we do have, these colleagues around us in other fields. So we were able to convince the the Mellon Foundation, and the foundation gave us funding for 4 years, in which basically a very large part of the initiative was to think about graduate students. That is to say, thinking about the work of graduate students, how to give them, to add to their profile in terms of the humanities, because we all understand the difficulty that the humanities face right now. So that to be able to give graduate students the opportunity to do some of this work, not that it should take away from the dissertation per se, but always sort of thinking of the translational work, of being able to talk about the dissertation to a broader public, is one of the things that we were thinking about. The opportunity for graduate students to be thinking about courses, you know, syllabi that they would produce that may or may not be directly connected to the dissertation. So these are opportunities that we were thinking of. And the other part of it was to run a seminar, which we hold in the spring, on the rural humanities. We did the first one last year, which was conceived more broadly for us to be thinking about the different ways in which we gathered approximately 15 students, half and half graduate and upper division undergraduate, in various projects here in our community. And by our community, we mean both Ithaca, but also the surrounding central New York area. That's one of the things that we planned for in the Rural Humanities Initiative. And then the following summer, there was a practicum, a summer practicum, in which students, some of them from the spring seminar, it wasn't automatic that they would go into the summer, they would have to apply. And then others who may have already been doing that work could also apply, but the insistence was that the work be sort of oriented towards the humanities. So those are the principal components of the Rural Humanities Initiative. Now, given the climate in the country, and also coinciding with some activism on the part of undergraduates, there was a group of undergraduates who got together under the title of Do Better Cornell, hashtag Do Better Cornell, in which they also asked for an anti-racism institute. And so Paul Fleming from the Society for the Humanities, my co-principal investigator, and I approached the student group and told them that as part of the momentum to what they wanted to do, we don't know what that institute will look like. That's a discussion that's also taking place in the faculty senate, under the insistence of the university president, Martha Pollock. And so that discussion is taking place, but we stepped up to the undergraduates and said that, you know, we're thinking of the momentum, and what we can do is sort of give a particular focus that would bridge some of the community engaged work with scholarship. And so we came up with the idea of the Rural Black Lives for this academic year. And Rural Black Lives for the academic year means that the seminar in the spring, which we're preparing, is going to focus on a contemporary as well as historical way of understanding the rural and Black lives, the experience of African Americans in the region. The historical part comes from my Underground Railroad seminar, which I've been teaching for the last 6 years. And that has been an experiential course in which we would take students to different sites in the region. Some of those sites, I have a map right here. And here's Ithaca at the bottom of Cayuga Lake. And some of the sites would go along here. There's this area here. There's a town, there's actually a township, a crossroads, in fact, called Sherwood, New York, where there's a museum. The Howland Stone Store Museum, which was owned by Quakers, but also Emily Howland was a very interesting figure who was both an abolitionist and later a suffragist. Of course, we have Seneca Falls here, quite nearby. And that, of course, as you know, is the site for the first women's suffrage conference in the country, if not the world. Here's Auburn, where we have Harriet Tubman's residence and burial site, as well as the house of William Henry Seward, who sold her the land, and he had been governor of New York State, senator of New York, and also the Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln. So these are sites that we would visit. We didn't visit Seneca Falls, actually, but along this area as, you know, parts of the Underground Railroad. But the place for us that was extremely important in my seminar was this church, the St. James AME Zion Church in downtown Ithaca, which is a known Underground Railroad station, visited by Frederick Douglass as well as Harriet Tubman. So we're doing some work with the church actively. And so that was part of the course where we would visit these sites. But now we've tried to make the course more engaged in the sense that we're working directly with the St. James AME Zion Church on a number of projects. One of them that we're very excited about is, given the situation with COVID, I have colleagues from the Cornell Institute of Archaeology and Material Studies who, unable to travel all over the world as they do, to do their excavations, decided to look in the local area and approached me about the possibility of an excavation here at the St. James AME Zion Church. That has been an extraordinary experience. First of all, because the church, the AME Zion Church, started at the end of the 18th century and in New York City area, was understood, was called the Freedom Church, but none of its churches have ever had anyone approach to do an excavation site. So this would be one of the first of its kinds, and my colleagues in archaeology are very excited. We've already undertaken a GPR scan, that is a ground penetrating radar scan. We've done 2 of those, and we did one on Sunday, in fact. And this was undertaken by a geophysicist who just keeps us in complete suspense, saying that we may not see a tunnel, but there's some interesting anomalies. So which anomalies that would encourage further exploration. So if there is an excavation, that will take place this summer. And the church and the church leadership is very excited about it. The way that we see it is we will not do any of this work without their cooperation, without their co-creation of the project. That is what, you know, I mean by the co-creation of knowledge. And the knowledge that would be created would be one, you know, knowledge that comes out of the excavation site itself. The church and my colleagues are very interested in having young people get on board, because this would be bringing together science and history in a way that would be very interesting for the community itself. And so we're looking to work together on this for the next few years. I currently run the Underground Railroad seminar I have about 6 students in that because it's a much more rigorous seminar than in the past. In the past, it was half a semester's course, and in fact, it's been now that it's expanded to full semester and there's a lot more research involved. It turns out that I have a fewer number of students, but it is a seminar environment. So that's the project that's going on with the St. James Church. Now, I've been able to bring this project into what we're going to be doing in the seminar in the spring. So that's going to be the historical part in conjunction with the work that the archaeologists are going to be doing. The other contemporary part that, that we're undertaking is working with Black farmers in the region. So to do that, I work with a colleague by the name of Anu Rangarajan, and she is the director of Cornell's Small Farm Projects, and she is establishing a community partners of Black farmers. And in fact, she informed these farmers, who are mostly African American women and women of color, who live in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and in other places all the way up to Buffalo. So just throughout the state, that she informed them that I was doing the Underground Railroad seminar, and they were interested in joining. Now, I couldn't have them join, about 25 of them. The seminar with 6 students, so I organized a separate seminar with them, and so we meet on Tuesdays and we go through pretty much the same syllabus, which is the classic slave narratives in the region, as well as a couple of important histories on the Underground Railroad. So those are the 2 components, a historical part and a much more contemporary part. With the farmers, we're developing, you know, those sorts of discussions, and we'll actually we're in the process right now of creating a webinar for the spring that would be looking at the dispossession of farms, of African-American farms, and also food justice. So we're trying to sort of coordinate that right now to have a webinar that would engage the subject. And one of the speakers will be coming actually from this group of African-American women who are in the Underground Railroad seminar that I'm conducting for the first time with them this year. I think I should stop here. I've given you a lot of information, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. The focus, just to close, the focus on rural Black lives, again, is the seminar will continue into the summer practicum, and we'll have various other activities, including the webinar itself. The initiative also offers funding for students, for example, micro grants of approximately 350. We also do virtual event micro grants for about $1,000. And then for faculty, we have funding for up to $10,000 per project per year, connected to the rural humanities, but specifically with rural Black lives whenever possible. So that's it in a nutshell, and I would be happy to listen, engage with any of the questions that you might have.
Wow, that was amazing, Gerard.
It's a lot.
It is, and it's just so exciting. It's so exciting to see how what seems to be the history of Cornell and the mission of Cornell that's been there from the very beginning is kind of coming full circle right at this moment, where it just has incredible power to open up these relationships, these kinds of questions in the place, in where you are in Ithaca. Yeah. And I'm really blown away by everything that you're doing, and I've got a bunch of questions, but
sorry, let me interrupt you just before you go on with the questions, but I also want to say that even though I'm sort of proud of having, being part of the universities taking this full circle. One of the things that's coming up for us is to be self-conscious and actively so about our relationship as a land-grant institution with the dispossession of indigenous lands. That sort of conversation is taking place, will continue to take place. And so I also just wanted to mention that, we need to also be critical of the ways in which the past, has brought us to this moment. But anyway, I interrupted. I'd be happy to hear any.
No, well, I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear more about that too. So all I want to say is, I know there will be questions from everyone who's here and some comments I put into the chat box. So if you'd like to say anything, just, you can either raise your hand, because I think I can see everyone, or send a chat and then I can help unmute so that you can go ahead and ask Gerard any questions you've got about everything he just presented to us.
Sure.
If everyone is shy and absorbing, I mean, I can start. I actually would like to hear, I had other questions, but I actually would like to know more about what Cornell is doing and what thinking is on campus about this issue of how Cornell either recognizes or acknowledges or does some kind of reparative work with regard to, indigenous land dispossession.
Yes, at the moment there isn't a sort of initiative that will bring in sort of the administration plus the criticism that's coming from several quarters, in terms of the students, but also the American Indian and Indigenous program, for example. So this is beginning to gather momentum. I don't know what it's going to look like, in the same way that, we don't know what the Anti-Racism Institute or Center will look like. Cornell is also now thinking about how to approach this subject. And there hasn't been that conversation yet between faculty, students, and the administration. What I can say is that the president is proactive about engaging the subjects. It's clearly the case. Her statements have been consistent since March, or in the spring. The statements that come, she was actually, some of the first statements, our department web pages have statements with regard to, Black Lives Matter and so on, but the university has actually been faster in getting those out, which is quite unusual. And so there have been remarks not only in terms of Black Lives Matter, but also thinking about the indigenous, sort of the dispossession of indigenous lands. So this is still coming, and in anticipation of it, Paul Fleming and I are, thinking about making next year's theme actually one on the indigenous Americans and the dispossession of lands up here. So we're trying to prepare for that. And I think that when all of those preparations come together, then, there will be some kind of discussion, a hard discussion, right? About what it's going to look like, after there has been some reflection and thought about, reparations, if at all, from Cornell's perspective. Yeah. So I can't speak for the administration. I can just tell you what I'm sensing, that there's momentum building, but I don't know what it's going to look like. But I think also it's been wonderful to have the Rural Humanities Initiative that gives us the flexibility to assist with any sort of project. For example, students with the microgrants, if they wanted to do something in connection with a course that they're already doing, something co-curricular, for example, that's a possibility. Everything from that level to projects, directly looking at the subject of land dispossession. So it's been great to have the versatility. of the Rural Humanities Initiative, because we're not very large and we're able to move quite quickly, in terms of not only positioning ourselves, but identifying the things that, we need to talk about in the humanities as well as at the university level. So that is definitely the case in terms of this year's Rural Black Lives theme. And we want to be able to do that next year as well, with Indigenous issues.
Wow. Dietrich, did you I wanted to acknowledge Dietrich Neumann, the director of our center, is here as well. I know he had like 3 conflicting meetings all scheduled for the same time, but.
Wonderful to meet you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And I must say, I really enjoyed, I had to check out for a moment in between because I had something else that I had to attend to, but we tape these things and I will watch the whole thing. But what I saw was so inspiring as we are in the process. I took over as director just months ago, and we're in the process of sort of rethinking the vision as we move forward. And I think there were so many great ideas in your talk that I really enjoyed in your initiatives at Cornell that I hope we can learn from, and maybe approach you with questions occasionally as we form new initiatives. I like your idea of the micro grants, and absolutely wonderful, these thematic initiatives every year or every 2 years. And the idea of rural humanities is absolutely brilliant, I think, and hopefully something we can adapt for our evolution here. And I think it's very exciting to see such inspiring initiatives over there. It's a pity we're in such a odd neighborhood that is very hard to get from Cornell to Providence. In
that there's some resemblance with the Caribbean, because very often, you'd have to go to Miami to go to the neighboring island, so I understand completely.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm sure we'll reach out with questions of how you manage some of these initiatives, because that's always
right
for us.
One of the things that I would put forward now, and this has again, so much of this becomes experimental. I found that all my work becomes experimental now. I think one of the things that I have observed, and I think we need to reflect on, is that I had the good fortune of doing a course that is not just an ordinary course. That is to say, I think what centers like ours can do is allow people to ask themselves the question, what would what sort of project, intellectual project, community engaged project would you undertake because you're so passionate about the subject, right? And so it no longer became a course that you ticked off, I've done that one, but because you're you're engaged with a community, you just can't say goodbye till the next time I teach the course. So it meant a kind of sustained commitment, right, with a project. And it was because of the possibilities of sustaining the project that people, stepped up. Because again, like people in archaeology, people in agricultural school, I've just been contacted by the Atkinson Center for a Sustainable Future because they've been hearing about, the excavation. Needless to say, there have been sort of press, television, stuff like that, and we just have to hold back a bit because sometimes that could be distracting. But I'm reminded of a good friend of mine who lives here, who's a carpenter. When I said, "Why is it that you have such a good business?" He says, "Well, I don't change the phone number, and I always answer the phone." In other words, you just keep at it long enough that people step up to you, so that in fact, what is just an amazing opportunity in terms of the archaeologists and the St. James AME Zion leadership and sort of brokering that conversation was something that I didn't plan on, but people stepped up. So so there is something to engaging with a project, a teaching project that has possibilities for scholarship as well. And I haven't mentioned those possibilities for scholarship, but it's something that's on my mind, and I do. I have submitted an idea to Cornell University Press because Cornell University Press does work on the region, and I'm hoping to convince them of, doing something on the Underground Railroad.
Oh, great.
That would not only as a historical sort of phenomenon, because we have great historians as well as local county historians working on this, right? And people who make themselves historians on this subject. So that's fascinating in itself. But I think just in terms of my own sort of scholarly training, there are opportunities that are coming up in which the sort of material study of the site may be very useful, for my even sort of theoretical work, right, on the movement from going to human property to personhood, right, and the path that takes through the Underground Railroad. It seems to me that there are real opportunities for doing some scholarship, the kind of scholarship that I was trained to do, but now in a context, right, that is sort of co-producing knowledge again, so yeah.
Yeah, and that is the new book proposal you mentioned, right? That's around this topic. It sounds fascinating.
Yes, again, it's something that's just emerged because of the contingencies of everything that's going on right now. So, I can give and I don't think we can give formulas for how this would work, right? But I think just we have to sort of, take the reins when these opportunities do emerge.
Yeah.
And I think our centers can be the sites, for those opportunities and that thinking. So I'm very happy to have this conversation with you.
You have accomplished something that we hope to accomplish, this sort of buy-in across the university, this interdisciplinarity. And I think that's so convincing in your case that you work with archaeologists and the agricultural center, which we don't have here, but that's a different story. We have others that we want to engage with. And I think ultimately it seems the students who go through your classes and through your program are well prepared to then take on leadership roles in community organizations afterwards, because they have already that exposure to personal engagement.
Yeah. Well, we want them to have exposure to the experimental nature of the work. Mm-hmm. Not that the outcomes are immediate, but to be comfortable with that process. I say it for faculty as well,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hannah, I was wondering what your reflections are. Hannah has sort of always brought to the program this real interest and commitment to what is happening in rural communities. Right. And like I said, she really connected us to what you all were doing.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think about the way that this new initiative navigates sort of these questions of local and regional history and sort of these wider national sort of systems-based questions around, the impact of this type of work in small communities, especially in areas now where connections can sometimes be more difficult to create since they're less dense, and reaching out to people is just practically more difficult. I don't know, how have you been deciding where to place your energies in, Ithaca and Central New York, and in these, larger considerations, I guess?
Right. Actually, the decision was made for us in the sense that when we first approached the Mellon Foundation with the idea of doing something in the rural, thinking of this is a moment for us to be rethinking the urban-rural divide. And we know how important and rich that has been for the ways in which we think of capitalism or the history of this country, et cetera, and many countries. So that was part of the work, but they were very interested in us in us doing something local, right? It's local. So once we understood that, then, we find ourselves operating at both levels. That is to say, on particular projects that can have us say something about broader sort of national issues and debates, so I think that is significant because having to do work on the local, it allows us to compile information, you know, projects and so on for the long run, you know, and will allow us to engage, you know, with community partners and so on. What I should say is, you know, we, Paul Fleming and I, were fully aware that colleagues are not necessarily willing to jump into community engaged work, because as we know, that requires training, that requires the cultivation of good practices with respect to community partners, you know, all of that, as you know, as you well know. So we wanted there to be between doing the typical work, sometimes with archival performance that we do in the humanities and community engaged work, there's that whole area of public humanities, right? And so, you know, we want to be able to have people step into that area and just basically talk more about the research that they're doing, you know, and finding ways to make that audible, visual, you know, disseminated on, and so for us to be able to work on the local has been important. For example, just looking at the Underground Railroad and the way we do has us saying a lot of things about race relations. The focus that I have in the seminar has been to look at how alliances are formed, how alliances disintegrate, right, in that historical period. And that is of supreme importance for the Black Lives Movement today, right? So what are the alliances? How are they made? What are the possibilities? So that if the Underground Railroad, you know, gives that sort of blueprint, you know, we have something to work with. And it gets people's attention, you know, to look back at those particular moments, you know. And it's been revealing and inspiring to see the ways in which both the students as well as the African American farmers that are in their seminar, in the other seminar, the surprise that they have, you know, for having not studied the classic slave narratives, you know, it's every time I have the course and I ask on the first day, you know, what is your exposure? It's practically nil, you know, in this country. And so, you know, when you're able to look back at those moments and think, inevitably students as well as the farmers are thinking about the contemporary moment, that they will pull us along in that direction every time, you know. So we get to address some of those large issues, but again, working closely and rigorously in the local has been a boon for our thinking in a broader sense, you know. And until, you know, we'll see what happens with COVID, but in the middle last year, we had to sort of move from, you know, the possibilities of engaging with the community to something much more online, and that sort of put us back a bit, and we had people do much more sort of public humanities explanation of the work that they do, as opposed to continuing with the community engaged work. So we, as everyone else, will have to see how that, you know, what happens in the next year or so. So yeah, I hope that answers some of the questions. But basically, you know, it's also good when the decision is taken away from you in that choice, you know, but you're still able to accomplish a work for a longer term, you know. So.
Well, I love the fact that you've gotten, you know, the kind of collaboration of your archaeology colleagues because of COVID, because I think we're all looking for some bright spots in what COVID has given us. So that's happy. Yeah. I'm wondering if you can share, I'm really interested in where the students are coming from, which departments the students are coming from, if you're getting a sense yet of whether this is impacting career trajectories or some of the things they're interested in doing. I mean, both undergrads and grads, and you know, some of those questions about the students and sort of who they are and how it is impacting them.
Yeah, we have noticed that the undergraduates come from all over the university, many of them in the sciences, right? But the graduates have been mostly in the humanities. in literature and history and so on, which is what we expected. Our hope, no, we don't have a sense yet. It's just, we've just completed 1 year of how it's impacting career choices. Some of the graduates already had community partner relations, right? So they were able to continue with that work. It's still a bit hard to have somebody working, for example, in a sort of philosophically oriented sort of English literature dissertation, and having that person, you know, work with more in the public humanities. Some of that work has gone more towards visual sort of photography and the reflection that that brings, you know, as a way of elaborating some aspect of the dissertation or creating a different project. We had one person, and this was fascinating, but he already came with, sometimes, you know, students self-select, right, as we know. So we had one graduate student from the English department who is a medievalist who works on eels. So he also worked with communities, with fishermen, with specific people who have contact with eels on the eastern seaboard, you know, so, and had those conversations with them and created some sort of web presence. So, you know, I think just having a medievalist, you know, sort of the symbolism of eels plus that work, it's not yet finished, the conversation, what could come out of that, but it certainly catches the attention of, you know, because he really did engage with scientists on the subject who were fascinated about the history of eels, right? So that's an example. Whereas there are others who are actually working on food justice and literature, agriculture and literature and so on. Those are, you know, those are some of the projects that emerged. And so I think it's still too soon for us to get a sense of that. But I do think the challenge will remain getting, you know, graduate students who have, you know, I mean, we are rewarded for doing the archival work and the work on performance, producing our articles, but to open that a little bit more to public humanities thinking is still a challenge. The undergraduates, I think, are able at this stage to think of the ways in which the work is good. There was one student who working with opioid users, and he was, you know, his medical career, was able to write up something for an op-ed, for example, you know. But as I said, there was a breadth in terms of the projects. What we have learned and what we are interested in seeing what happens this year is we're focusing the projects more on a particular theme, which is what the Society for the Humanities has always done, but on a particular theme that will allow us to identify the community partners early and make sure that those, you know, contacts are established, because sometimes last year the students did have a bit of difficulty establishing and then having to work, and then COVID, it was just not possible. And as we know, many of these projects just don't end at the end of the semester. They draw into the summer, into another time. But in that sense, I think we were happy with the ways in which students were seeing a path, sort of continuity with what they were doing and their thinking professionally. So I would say the opportunities are there, but we don't have data on that yet, you know, and here I am, perfect humanist asking for data. You know.
Well, I'm sure the foundation's going to be asking for the data, so.
Exactly.
Great. Any other questions or comments? I'm really excited. I definitely want to go and spend more time on the website and see what you guys are doing. And as Dietrich said, I think, you know, also we're just interested in cribbing, maybe cribbing from what you all are doing, and learning more about it, learning more about kind of some of the back end questions about how you're staffing it, and you know, how you take on a project that is this big, that's so, you know, it's obviously a really important experience and will be for all the faculty and the students, but then also you just tighten up these bonds with community organizations and residents. And when it's a 4-year project with funding that may run out after 4 years, you know, how you think about how to keep some of this, the relationships and the commitments and the work ongoing is a tough one too.
It is, but you know, we have every intention of applying for another 4 years.
Yeah.
We also have, you know, we're accompanied also by Engaged Cornell, that particular project, which is a 10-year project. I think they're in year 5 or 6 right now. So their funding will also come to an end. And in their case, they're interested in the long-term transforming the culture of the university. And I think we have benefited from that idea and represent some part in that transformation, you know. Yeah. So long as we continue to do this work, I think there will be opportunities, other sort of funding opportunities for us to be thinking about. So we're hopeful, and you know, and looking forward to the possible projects here. You know, I think when the faculty also approach us, they're also thinking seriously of their own research projects. You know, they're not just thinking of, and I think this is the bias sometimes against this type of work, is people think that it's community service, right? You know, that is strictly community service, when in fact, the book project I have in mind could not have been done without, you know, my experience with the community partner. And the book project will, as from what I can tell, will solidly be engaging with theoretical issues, you know, for which we're expected within sort of literature, culture, studies, you know, and so on. So I'm looking forward to that. And I felt that you know, I can finally imagine it, because if there is any way to, you know, enter conversations with colleagues in the humanities, you know, and say, well, yes, this project did come out of that relationship. I'm not saying that, you know, my path is the only path to do this, but it's the possibilities are there for us to be thinking, you know, about relaxing a little bit about the production of you know, of course I can say that post tenure, right? Mm-hmm. You know, about the time that some of these projects take, because in fact, I cannot predict what the rhythm is, but the fact that people are stepping up and the project is taking on this sort of life of its own, I think it's also important that I don't be the only sort of organizing person within a project on rural Black lives or rural humanities, you know. I think the onus remains to demonstrate what it could look like, right? As long as that process might take for that development, but I think it's a worthwhile effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the work. I know we'll all stay tuned, and really excited also to even see what you all are up to next year too.
Yes, we're in the middle of those conversations right now, and to give you a sense of that possibility, we approached certain faculty who are working on Indigenous studies. And in our conversation, their impression had been that we were trying to mount something separate from what they were doing. We were saying, no, we want you to do it.
Right.
And here's the structure. Here are the templates for stuff that we've already done. We can, you know, assist with the logistics, and I think that was part of your question as well. We have, thanks to the, you know, the Rural Humanities Initiative is housed in the Society for the Humanities, so we do have administrative assistance from the Society for the Humanities, basically 2 people who are also doing other work for the Society for the Humanities, but this is now part of their responsibility. And there's a 3rd person as well who does a lot of the, you know, sort of public engaged sort of logistics, you know. I think because of the way in which these things grow, that we still need more administrative help, but then it's better for us to show what we've accomplished and our needs the next time around, you know, to make sure that we budget, you know, for those sorts of things. But it was interesting, you know, to have that conversation with people invested in sort of an Indigenous studies program, to let them know that, no, we're not mounting something separate from you. We don't have the expertise. We wouldn't try, you know. And they, you know, immediately warned us at the get-go that the politics among the Indigenous communities is very complicated, right? And you have to be able to steer that well. So they are the experts. So what we're just offering is the ability to say, okay, bring your debates, bring your concerns, and let's talk about them within a seminar environment and see what sort of projects would come out of that. You know, so they were very happy knowing that there was this structure and, you know, sort of assistance with logistics to be able to undertake such a project. So we'll see how it goes.
So is one of those faculty teaching the seminar and overseeing the practicum?
So the fact they will, you know, there are a couple of faculty, there may be 2 or 3, you know. The first time we did it, there were 3 of us, you know. This year on the Rural Black Lives, it will be me, but I'm bringing in, you know, colleagues from anthropology, colleagues from agriculture, anthropology and archaeology, and colleagues from agriculture. So the onus is on me is to, you know, to sort of work on the logistics myself, but it could be 2 or 3 faculty members doing that in the seminar. And generally the summer practicum is 1 faculty member plus with assistance from someone from Engaged Cornell, who has a lot of experience with community engaged work and also the cultivation of partnerships.
That's great.
Yeah, so
thank you.
That's the plan.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to let you know what we're doing, and, you know, I hope we keep in touch so that, you know, we're able to do this together, because it really does help, even on this occasion, for me to be able to exchange some ideas about what we're doing. Obliges me to look at some of what we've done and where we still need to go.
I think there's a lot we can learn from you, and there's so much creativity involved in solving these things and reaching out and creating new constellations. Really wonderful. I always say, I mean, there's so much that can stress us out these days, but on the other hand, we live in really exciting times where these new ideas come up and new initiatives are formed and supported. So very optimistic, actually, as we move forward.
It is, because I tell you, with this work, that's okay. I was expecting my dog to come up here.
I've been waiting for mine too the entire time to go. She's sleeping right behind me. This work, which I consider to be positive work, occupies so much of my attention that I really don't, you know, wallow in the news. I really don't have time, you know, and it makes me feel like I'm contributing in some small way to, you know, a broader issue. So, and I think there's real value in that. You know, there's a certain humility that we have to assume in this type of work as well, which is interesting. I do recall when I went to the Howland Stone Store Museum, where I did attend one of their meetings, and I mentioned the possibility of working with them, with students and so on. And you know, a farmer there said to me, that sounds like a win-win situation. We'll get back to you. You know, so you become, you have a certain amount of expertise, but you're not the only one coming to the table. Yeah. You know, so that was important to remember. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marissa, Hannah.
Yeah, make all these connections, and we'll hopefully, you know, be in touch now. So,
wonderful. I look forward to it.
Okay. Thanks, Gerard.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.